described it was sipping coffee, eating their roll
of Brookline Reads. And it is probably the most exciting project I've ever been involved in. When we first talked about doing this, what we hoped would happen is that people would read a book that they enjoyed or didn't, talk about it and say why it was good or it wasn't, and then share ideas about the story. What in fact has turned out to be a community building project has encouraged people of all ages to read, complain about the language, but decide that the story has a lot of merit. In many ways, it's profound, and we appreciate that most people notice that. Yesterday, I had the pleasure of reading to a group of 7th graders, and I chose a chapter 13 from Snow in August. And those of you familiar with the book will remember that Rabbi Hirsch, who is a refugee from Prague, it's 1947, it's Brooklyn, New York, and the Rabbi and a boy who is Michael Devlin, who's 11 years old, and whose father was killed in the Battle of the Bulge, are sharing information. The boy is teaching the rabbi English, and the rabbi is teaching this very inquisitive and imaginative young man Yiddish. And at some point in this particular part of the story, the boy is asking about language and writing. And the rabbi says, first came words, and that's what we're talking about. That's what we're doing. We're learning words from each other. Then came writing and reading. Well, we sort of reversed that when we asked you to first read the book. How many of you have read Snow in August? Hey. Then I won't tell you any more about the book. But I will tell you that I get all the best parts of this program. And one of them is to be able to introduce to you a person who knows the community of Brookline probably as well as anybody who might. He knows, he understands the area where we live. Rabbi William Hamilton, who's the senior rabbi at Congregation Kehelet Israel.
I am a little intimidated by that notion that I know Brookline as well as anybody, because I have been in Brookline just 9 years now, and have certainly enormous respect for many of you who may have been here for generations, and indeed maybe several generations part of this great community that we make up. But I will tell you that when Roberta asked me to be a part of this evening some months ago, I was very, very excited. And I hope to share a thought or two about why that excitement was so strong for me, even before I had read Snow in August, which made me even more engaged and more excited. I think that the panel we have for conversation this evening is a very, very special group of individuals. I'm going to introduce them first simply by saying a few words about them. Perhaps some things that you know, perhaps some of them are known to you. And then I'll share some personal words of reflection on the content of Snow in August, some of the things that the broader themes that are part of this project. A little more on the essence of the project, and I'll invite them each to share their impressions. Each one of the panelists will speak for about 5 minutes. After that, one of the central goals of this evening, since this is the centerpiece of this whole sharing experience for the town, is that this be a very interactive evening. That you be invited to share observations, ask questions, raise points with the panelists and with each other, such that we engage in a very special conversation tonight that will amplify what we've read, advance the goals of this project, and make tonight very, very special and memorable indeed. For our panelists, seated on the far of your right, we have Dr. Gennady Gorelick, who is a scientist, actually a historian of science. He currently is at Boston University in the Center for Philosophy and the History of Science. In addition to having been awarded the Dibner Fellowship at MIT upon his arrival to this country about 10 years ago, he is a Guggenheim Fellow. He came from the former Soviet Union in 1993, and we are very, very happy that he's with us tonight. Seated immediately to his left, someone that many of us may know, Dr. Thomas O'Connor, a professor emeritus, university historian at Boston College, the author of several books on the Irish in Boston, and we're delighted he's part of the panel. Tom, thank you for being here as well. And to the left of Tom, we're delighted that Jeannie Benjamin is with us. Jeannie is actually trained as a pediatrician, as was indicated in the Brookline Adult and Community Education brochure, but she actually currently practices psychotherapy. She specializes in hypnosis and hypnotherapy and has a private practice, an office in her own home, and for that we can all appreciate the importance of being able to run a very successful professional practice and have time for her family. We're delighted, Jeannie, that you could be with us here tonight. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Ed Wang, who is with us tonight, is a clinical instructor in the Department of Psychiatry at the Harvard Medical School. He, as many of you know here in Brookline, serves as the Vice Chair for the Human Relations Commission and Youth Resources. And he is the Director of Multicultural Affairs in the Department of Mental Health. It's also worth noting, perhaps we could say a word before each of these panelists speak about the duration of their time here in Brookline. I told you I'm 9 years. By the way, I noticed some of Brookline's finest here. The police, I understand that this book was actually read by the department, and that's thrilling news as well, given the importance of your role helping to serve and protect our community as you do so wonderfully with such regularity. I'm delighted that some of you are here tonight as well. America respects diversity, but admires authenticity. Tonight, we prepare to engage in a vital conversation on a subject that is timeless in some ways and extremely timely in others. The question of how to have a self and let others have their self as well is one that occupies us, certainly in our nation and our communities around this country, as we prepare for an election in the coming fall. And it's something that is very much on our minds for all kinds of good reasons, some of which we may touch on tonight, that are very much in the news. The whole question of how we are able to retain a sense of self, an appreciation for our authenticity, for the dignity of difference, and at the same time be open and accepting to the stories and the narratives of others is a timeless question that I know we're going to enjoy engaging in tonight in our conversation. Adaptation, assimilation for the sake of acceptance is very, very important to the fabric of our great land. And I would argue that what we're going to do tonight is a very patriotic experience, certainly one that the founding figures of our nation would appreciate, in the power of civic coming together for these kinds of conversations. Affirming commonalities and yet appreciating differences. Lending that dignity to difference, in many ways, is one of the things that I found in Snow in August. In the sense, it's very easy to read about the immigrant experience. It's very easy to read about the melting pot, about the idea that different groups, the Irish and Jews, get to know each other and travel paths that in some ways are similar, in some ways radically different. But to actually frame that experience in a narrative, the way Pete Hamill does in this book, I understand a number of you were at the screening of the film, which was thanks to the very, very wonderful program last week, clarify the differences between the film and the book. But it seems to me that it's an extremely important context for us to be able to appreciate what we read about in history books. Because these are human lives, these are individuals. We see the depth of their lives, the depth of their experiences, and of course that human touch that Pete brings to his writing is something that helps bring home in much more powerful ways the broader concepts of the dignity of difference. A cross-community conversation that I hope we're going to engage in tonight is the vision of what this whole read, share experience in Brookline is about, thanks to our public library. It is the vision for what we in Brookline can be. Tonight, let us together show the way. Welcome again. At this time, I'm going to invite, we'll start actually in the order in which our speakers appeared in the brochure for Brookline Adult and Community Education. So I'm going to invite Dr. Thomas O'Connor to share some reflections for a few minutes now, specifically on how he read the book, what he took from it, and what he'd like to share with us this evening.
I never read Snow in August before Roberta gave me a copy of it and asked me to join the panel this evening. I didn't know what to expect. The title really doesn't tell you much. So therefore, when I opened it up and began to read it, I suddenly found myself in very familiar territory. In many ways, throwing my mind back, I was Michael Devlin, not Tom O'Connor. And I was in an area that I knew very, very well. Now with some differences. This is not Brooklyn, it's South Boston. It's not the 1950s, I'm sorry to say. It's the 1930s. Michael Devlin's father was killed in World War II. My father had fought in World War I. So I'm going back to a slight generational difference. But Pete Hamill writes about where I was born and grew up. Irish, Catholic, South Boston. And many of the points that he makes in the book are right on. It's very, very familiar territory. These are very familiar people. Even many of the episodes struck home to me. For example, when Michael's mother thinks he needs a new suit and brings him in town. My father died when I was 15. I needed a suit. My mother wanted me to get a blue serge suit. So she took me into Nealon Street. That's somebody's nodding, you know. To a garment factory. And I can remember a rickety elevator going up to the 4th floor, and there were rows and rows of suits. And I got a suit from a Jewish tailor in that area. It's similar to slight difference. Because in growing up in Irish Catholic South Boston, I don't recall any Jewish people living there. Now, there may have been, but I didn't know them. And yet, there were Jewish people in South Boston. They came in the morning, and they opened their stores. There was Sam's Meat Market on the corner, and there was Mac's Stationery Store in the middle. There was Louis' Deli at the end, and there was Pover's clothing store, and my favorite store, Slocum's, where I went to get the model aeroplanes that we made out of balsa wood then, no plastic. Many Jewish people were in South Boston. Very close friendships were made over the years. These people were very, very close. But every night, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, they closed their stores. And they went back to Blue Hill Avenue, because that's where they belong. And that was the theme just a few minutes ago that Rabbi Hamilton made that struck me as I recall reading this book. The question of how to have self, and how to let others have self. When I was growing up, this was resolved by separating people. I grew up, and perhaps you grew up, some of you, at a time when the watchword was what? Stay with your own kind. Marry your own kind. All different groups remained separate and separated. Not really the Jewish people, but in South Boston, the Italians stayed in certain areas, and the Polish people stayed in certain areas. If you ask me, where will I find the Lithuanians? Down on D Street. Very, very clear. Everybody lived separately. And in that way, you didn't have to raise questions about these matters. Except if people didn't stay where they belonged. And that was the issue with Rabbi Hirsch in the book. That in the minds of many of those people, he wasn't where he belonged. He shouldn't be there. And so we've lived through periods. Myself in the 30s and 40s, again, you're Michael Devlin in the 50s and going into the 60s and so forth, where the solution to many of these problems of allowing people to have their self was to keep them separated. Never get together. Never know. Never ask questions. Never find out. Why? Because it doesn't matter. We now live in a period of time where, thank God, that kind of separation is no longer possible. It is no longer permissible. And therefore, we have to find different ways now of learning how to have ourselves and let other people have their selves when we're not separated, when we're not segregated anymore, but we're all together. Now, how do you do that? I assume that that's part of the discussion this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom, very, very much. Before I introduce our next panelist, I'll share one of my favorite texts. It's a biblical text, and it relates to the experience of the children of Israel trying to ascertain what the possibility of being able to cross the Jordan and enter the promised land is going to be. And Moses sends 12 scouts. But they have no idea what to look for. He tells them, he says, if you see the people in the land of Canaan, the land of the promised land, if you see them organizing themselves in communities that have very high walls, fortresses, towers, ramparts, if you see that this is the way they build their communities, then know that the communities in the promised land are weak. They're weak because they fear danger from the outside. may see the other as a threat, and they require an early warning system, a high wall to separate them. If you see, on the other hand, that they are dwelling and organizing themselves in communities out in the open, without walls around them, then know that they're very strong. Then their sense of who they are and their own strengths, they're not only able to defend themselves and take care of themselves, they actually welcome, through their openness, as a sign of strength, they welcome interfacing with others. They see productivity and depth in that coming together, and perhaps, as we'll talk a little later on, perhaps the capacity to enrich self as because of the other is something that will be continue to be a benefit for our communities, having taken a different approach into this new millennium. I ask to give a warm welcome to our next panelist, Dr. Gennady Gorlick.
The main reason why I'm here is that about 10 years ago, I made some efforts to keep Russian culture alive for my son. When we arrived from Russia about 10 years ago, he was 10 at Frankel School, and I understand that he made no secret about two double burden of him, both English and Russian language. As to me, I understand it's more double engine than double burden. And I was based on my own experience, my family experience. While I was enjoying the storyline of the book, I was revisiting my own childhood and adolescence, and I remember very well that I experienced the first contact of different cultures in a very natural way. I don't think that I realized it was a contact, because it was my dad who sang songs of different nature. He sang a song, his songs were Russian folk song, Jewish folk song, and Ukrainian. My father grew up in a small Jewish village, so his first language was Yiddish. But after he left his village and took education and then moved to military, during World War II he was in the battle, and I was lucky that he was wounded 3 times, but then 3 times back on the front line, but nevertheless he, thanks God, was back. And I enjoyed his songs, and I realized that there was very different worlds: Ukrainian songs, Russian songs, and Yiddish songs. But for me, all of them were native. So when I was old enough and realized that we're a real different cultures, I felt myself enriched very much. When reading this book and revisiting my own experience, I found it striking parallels. When in the Michael age, I was reading the same Jack London. It was in the depth of Russia, in the town, which name I suspect you have never heard, but it's the name is Lipetsk. And I read Jack London, and for me it was the first introduction to American characters. And so for me to see the Michael with the same kind of experience, the encyclopedia, and the Jack London was just the same for me, even if I was in Russia. Then I'd like to say that as soon as I saw the title of the book, it told me a lot, because I thought that somehow I have to meet a song that was very familiar to me from my childhood. It was in Yiddish, and it was kind of a topsy-turvy song. And my father sang it. Let me try to introduce to reproduce it first in Yiddish. Zumeraunt in der Frey, is a Schnee gegangen, unabgebrannt der Stree, is gehangen. Let me try to read it into English. Summer evening, in the dawn, it was badly snowing. And the bear hung himself on a burnt straw. It was fun for me, enjoyable, but now when I am old enough, I realize that it's more than fun. It's kind of a preparation to a miracle. You have to be prepared to a miracle. A miracle could be not only a golem as your defender, but also just a meeting with some special person that changed your life thoroughly. So I was kind of disappointed when the sun never appeared in the book, but nevertheless, in my reading it did appear. So I was fascinated very much in this storyline. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Very, very much, and we hope we'll be able to find some of the richness of the harmony of many different songs together tonight as we continue, as we'll engage in the conversation together in just a few minutes. Our next contributor, our next panelist, is Dr. Ed Wang. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Actually, it's quite amazing that you're using a book that can draw out so much reactions of different ways, and you know, in some senses, really what we're talking about really is diversity from a historical perspective. A historian that painted the picture of the last 50+ years in Boston and around here, and how that, in some sense, compared to Brooklyn and personal experience that you brought over from Russia. And I actually read the book and I have a different reaction, different kind of perceptions about what is being talked about, which is kind of very interesting. How it draws us out is almost like doing a Rorschach that, different people look at it differently and perceive it differently and come up with a different response. The interesting thing is that what happened if I was being introduced not as what I do for my career, but rather if Rabbi Hamilton, of course I have to tell him first, to say that Ed Wang is a father of 2 children, has a wonderful wife who has some Irish heritage, and so forth and so forth. Will you perceive me a little differently when I'm standing up here start talking to you versus telling you that I'm a clinical instructor with Harvard Medical School and being a vice chair for Human Relations Commission? How interesting if the introduction is a little different. No difference that if I came to one of your parties and one of your friends introduced me to you and saying that this is Ed Wang, he is a soccer coach. I've been doing soccer for the Brookline team for many, many years. You will look at me a little differently than how I was being introduced up here. And I want for you to remember that, because I think that's the excitement of who we are as a human being in many social, many different types of situations. So I have no history to tell you per se, like the other 2 previous speakers. Of course, I have my own personal history. I came from Hong Kong about 32 years ago when I was 16. So when I was reading the book, certainly that also brought a lot of reaction from my part when I was a teenager, that when I was in Hong Kong, when I was 16, 32 years ago. But what I want to share with you particularly is the kind of my general reaction to the book. But let me start with, since Rabbi Hamilton talked about the melting pot, what I would like to do is start with a number of metaphors that we use to describe our society. Melting pot, a melting pot, a mosaic, some of you probably heard that, kaleidoscope, we heard that also. I sometimes use the term a tossed salad. That's what our society is like. And then, of course, more technical, like pluralistic society, a diverse society, just to name a few. Now, we have a tendency, as human beings, we like to kind of label things, because that makes sense to us. That is maybe a way of beginning to talk to each other. But I think one of the things that we all know, though, each of us as an individual or as a member of a group, because that is different, that we see, we hear, and we experience things very differently. And the example I gave earlier is that when I read the book, I react in a certain way. When you read the book, you will probably react a certain way, but there's also some commonalities and some differences. So our individual or collective experience as a group generate different perceptions, attitudes, actions, reactions, needs, and wishes, right? Because as a group, we all live in Brookline. What are some of the similarities? What are some of the differences? This book brought me to think about that. Why are we meeting here today? Why did the Board of Trustees of the library select a book? Why this book versus another book? I think sometimes the bottom line is that when we deal about human nature or human behaviors, the bottom line is, a slang that I learned when I was very early, coming to the United States, is it takes two to tango, right? Now I change it a little bit, make it a little bit more sophisticated, and I would say cross-cultural communication, cross-cultural interaction, right? That's what we talk about. We talk about rabbi, we talk about a young Irish man, as a matter of fact, a teenager. So it takes two to tango. A cross-cultural interaction poses certain challenges around us. And I want to kind of mention several of them because that's what I see in the book when one person talk to, interact, open up to another person. We need to be a little bit more curious. Curiosity is a big thing. That's the theme that I get out in terms of curiosity. A little bit more open-minded, a little bit more tolerance of differences, taking a little bit more risk, and sharing a little bit more about ourselves to the other person. Feeling okay when we are a little bit more vulnerable in those situations, and searching for more common grounds, and I think that's important. Baseball. Many of these experiences were portrayed, as you know, by the characters in Snow in August. I know my time is up, but let me quickly just finish it. There are many scenes that depict these cross-cultural experiences. When Michael first met with Rabbi Hirsch, the all-for-one and one-for-all relations of the three boys, Rabbi Hirsch sharing with Kate and Michael about his wife Leah, the fighting during the Dodgers game, and on and on and on. There's a lot of scenes and a lot of imageries. But the one that actually I like best, and this is my own Rorschach presented to you from that book, all these scenes, I ask myself, what is the most important scene to me? I think it's the Easter Sunday, when a group of men helped to clean off the red swastikas and the Jew gold that defaced the synagogue's walls and the door. To me, that is the most powerful image. But even more powerful, though, is what's coming up a couple sentences later. I'm not going to read it to you. It said something like, after the cleaning, that the silence and the awkwardness followed. Remember that? I think that was a very powerful image. These men got together and go and erase the hatred. At the end, it was described they were sipping coffee, eating their rolls from the bakery, and silent. They did not how to communicate with the rabbi. They did not how to communicate with each other based on that experience. So we're saying that, wow, a teaching moment, a moment that everyone can learn from each other and can share. Now we're doing that here, sharing. We're talking. They're acting as a group. That to me is very powerful. They just couldn't even talk about it. What hurts inside, what brings them together as a cohesive group. Then you can say that, for those few, I'm trying to stereotype this. People say, well, because these are all men talk to each other. Maybe. But the reality to me, I think, is a very, very powerful scene. They can energize themselves together and do the right thing, but at the end, they still cannot talk to each other. And let me just finish with one more sentence. This is what I believe in. And challenge me and discuss this, if we can, in here, if possible. I say diversity, because the term is being used quite often now in the town of Brookline. I say diversity is not synonymous with differences, but encompasses both similarities and differences. And more importantly, I believe, diversity is the capacity to see similarity in difference and to respect difference in similarity. And I open that for later discussion, what that means and so forth. But that's my goal, that's my hope after reading this book.
us that in many ways what we see, this whole exercise, is really going to be a reflection of what's in us in a very, very profound way. And thank you as well for reminding us that who we are may or may not be related to what we do in life. That is, it's shorthand to say, to indicate I'm a rabbi in a synagogue. It may tell you something about who I am, but it may not. May tell you how I spend my day, but not know that much about who I am. And thank you for sending that to that as well. And last, and certainly not least, I ask them to give a very, very warm welcome to Jeanine Benjamin.
In reading this book, I found a lot that I identified with, and I couldn't put it down. I wanted to find out what was going to happen next, and what this kid was going to do, and what was going to happen, what these people were going to do. So I didn't expect to take to this book the way I did. I could see a lot of myself in that boy, although we come from vastly different backgrounds. The time span isn't very different. I was born in 1950, so he was probably a little older than me. But the playing with your friends, the summer afternoons, those summer days that just stretched out into eternity, I could definitely relate to. I could also relate to the experience of the rabbi, and I could relate to the experience of the description of the ghetto in Prague. And when I grew up in Southwest Georgia in the 50s, I lived there until I graduated from high school, and I went off to college to Illinois, which I thought was the North, and they apparently hadn't heard that. And I grew up in a very hierarchical, segregated society. My schooling was all segregated. There were not walls around the ghetto. There was a cultural ghetto that existed. And within those walls, as a child, there was great comfort. There was great comfort that the things that I was protected from, people's disdain to the color of my skin. My teachers were all the same color that I was. The children that I played with, my neighbors, the store that I went to, the doctor that I went to. So I was protected in many ways as a child, from the more odious aspects of a racially segregated society. Only as I got to be older did I begin to realize the price that my grandparents paid and that my parents paid living in that kind of society. But as they described, even in that ghetto in Prague, and they talked about the roses and the summer nights, that really reverberated for me as that place of safety where I was not thrown into that trash compactor of integration that occurred when I was in high school. They began the process of integrating, starting with the first grade and the 12th grade, and they were going to work their way in. I elected not to go to the white school, because basically what integration meant was that the black students would get to go to the white school. Black school stayed at black school. And I elected to stay with my school. My father was the principal, and it just didn't seem right that I thought that I was going to get a better education somewhere else. And I don't have any regrets about that. However, once I was moving out into choosing a college and wanting an experience of the larger world, then I looked at, rather than going to a historically black college, looked at integrated at schools in which there were going to be experiments in integration. So the kinds of things that you saw with the interactions between the different groups in that community were the kinds of things that I saw in college and as an adult as I have grown up and entered communities, have had that experience. I've been in Boston since 1971 when I came here to go to medical school. And I've lived in Brookline for 23 years now. And I still feel around the boundaries. I have had a child at the Heath School since, let's see, how old was Sasha when she started there? We've had a kid at that school for like 20-something years now. But I still had experiences of going and being in the hall and having someone come up and ask me, can I help you? With an obvious, puzzled expression on their face about who I was and what I was doing there. And it is, it's those kinds of interactions that in which you cease to become an individual that gradually erode your goodwill and gradually erode your ability to reach out across boundaries. As I read that book, and I was totally into it until the last chapter, when this miraculous thing happened, and I was like, where'd that come from? All of a sudden, like, we got this story, this fairy tale happening here. And I looked at my own reaction to that, and I'm like, well, why am I having such a hard time? Why can't it just be that there's a miracle? Why can't there just be that there's a miracle? And when I look at the way different groups of people interact with each other, and I say, what would be the miracle there? What would be the miracle that would allow individuals to show up as individuals rather than representations of some larger group? When I hear people talk about diversity, usually my experience of their take on diversity is that, oh, look, there's a black person at this event. This is diversity, this is a diverse crowd. And I've come to believe, and even in dealing with my own issues around what is diversity, is you don't hit diversity until you're uncomfortable. That the other group's difference is enough to get your attention. And it's not about feeling good about yourself that you're in a room where, oh, there's a black person. No. It's about being able to live with what you're uncomfortable with, to respect what you're uncomfortable with. So the golem is actually us, that we have to create that miracle, that we have to learn how to become comfortable with what we are uncomfortable with. So it's easy to say we all are the same and we all have the same things that we want to get to in life. We want the same things for our children. Absolutely. I think that's absolutely true. But people have very different ways of going about that. And when we can be respectful about those differences and accepting about those differences, then you got a miracle.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Benjamin. I will say that inherent in that very poignant observation that you share is the capacity to change, to go from discomfort to something new, but to scratch the discomfort first. Because if we haven't done that, then we haven't done anything new. We've just sort of settled back into what's been comfortable all along. In that spirit, the design of tonight, as I said at the outset, is very much to engage in the conversation. By the way, I think it's important that I say, as moderator, you didn't have to like the book. Yeah, actually, the book itself was meant to be an opportunity, a common experience that would evoke conversation, reaction, the kind of Rorschach test that we talked about a few minutes ago that Ed mentioned, that the library trustees picked this book had more to do with its accessibility and its themes than that it's the finest novel ever written. And with that having been said, I really would like very much to open it up to all of you and to our panelists as well to see what themes that were observed by the panelists, each various student their observations, and appreciably very concise in their observations as well, to see what some of your reactions were, as a little bit about who you are, and comments or questions that you want to bring to the panelists based on what they have to share tonight. And I'm going to walk around with the mic, bring it down, but we can make our way through this auditorium in keeping with the idea of the communal conversation so that we can all hear each other. Would anybody like to offer a reaction or a comment or a question of our panelists? We can include our panelists of each other. I'm going to come on down.
Echoing Dr. Benjamin, I had trouble with the last chapter too. It didn't quite fit until I thought about it. I slept on it, and then I started to remember that this was a very special boy, Michael Devlin. I mean, when he heard the story that the rabbi told, he was there. He was in Prague. He knew what the people were drinking. He knew what the people were wearing. He knew what the people were feeling. And he had this powerful, creative imagination. On top of that, this was a story about good and evil. I mean, this is a story that was really in blacks and whites, because there were some characters in this that there was absolutely nothing good about them. And there was evil as evil could possibly be. And then there was this boy who was as good and as, I mean, he had every reason to be. One thing I also noticed was that we don't hear the word juvenile delinquent anymore. I don't know if we solved that problem or not. It was very big back then, and I had completely forgotten about it, and now I'm worried about it. We call it something else, but we reframed it. But no, I think that he was a remarkable kid, and we're really drawn to this kid because he's because he has every reason to be bitter and to be out in the streets, but here he is. He's getting up in the morning. He's an altar boy. He's pulling for Jackie Robinson, and he's able to cross the cultural barriers to accept this very different guy who lives in a world that I mean, he's afraid to enter it first because he doesn't know what's going to happen to him. There's so many myths and stories about what the Jews did, behind the doors that the Gentiles didn't see. So I thought that there was so much focused on this boy the only thing he did wrong in the book was to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, and he couldn't. Whatever he did after that, he suffered. He suffered by not telling, and he suffered anyway. And so I think what he did, for me, I think what he did at the very end was he adopted he found power. And that whole story about the golem is a way in which the poor Jewish people, against great odds, were able to find a way to survive a very horrible situation. And here's this little kid running around the streets, and there's these big, tough, armed guys, and there's nobody. He has no father here. There's no good guys there. The priest is a good guy, but we don't. He somehow or other is aloof, and but he does the right thing. But Michael's drawn to the rabbi. The rabbi has more to give him. But I kind of think that I'm talking to him. But I kind of think the boy is really the focus, and when we talked about it, someone spoke about, in the movie theater about how it was really a story of America coming together. And I think of Michael Devin as being the American that we all want to be, we all strive to be. We're looking for truth, we're looking for justice, and we're looking for harmony, and couldn't find it until we created it. Anyhow, that was what I got.
Just say, if everybody could just say their name and perhaps since this is a Brookline conversation, the only appropriate thing to say would be how long we consider ourselves and how long we lived in Brookline. So
That's a hard question to answer.
Oh, sorry.
Because most of my life I lived on the other side of the Brookline line in Boston. So, but I'm a Bostonian. I'm a Lincoln School parent. I did go there in the community. Bernie Clark.
Thank you very, very much. I don't know if anybody has on the panel has a reaction to Bernie's take on the book itself, but it seems to me that the whole question that I want to lift up from what Ed had to say earlier is this whole idea of curiosity, of the desire to want to learn something from everybody, and to really push the envelope on that in terms of getting a little uncomfortable. It's been said that at a dinner party, the most interesting people in the room are the most interested in the room. The people who seem to ask the most questions, the people who seem to be most interested in what everybody else standing around is going to have to teach them or share with them. And that's the spirit, certainly, I'd like to continue the conversation this evening. Any reactions? Other comments? Please. Questions? Thank you. And again, you just simply would state your name and duration of time and town.
I'm Peter Springer. I've been in town since '72. I'm interested in what your reaction is to the Golem. I want to know what people thought of the Golem.
Reaction to the Golem. That final chapter.
I had a problem.
Problem with the Golem.
I've been following the narrative all along. It's realistic. It's well told, narrative, straight, I understand. And then I hit chapter 30, but it was. And it was like Captain Marvel arrived. I don't mean to be dismissive of it. But Shazam, suddenly, in the theater, this would be a Deus Ex Machina. This is a source from outer space that's been brought in to solve everything. And the solution, I couldn't have loved more. I mean, it would have been, this would have been my ideal if I were that youngster there. Like he mopped up the floor with them. He tore them limb from limb. It was wonderful. But it doesn't happen that way. This is my problem. In other words, and this is the way he closes it out. Is this, and you know, Rabbi Hirsch's teeth are back in place, his bones are knit. We'd love to see that. I'd love to see that. But it doesn't happen. And what does then that leave young Michael with? The solutions are going to happen like this for the rest of his life? That when he runs into problems when he's 21, does he raise the golem again? How many times? I mean, I'm sorry. It seemed completely out of whack.
Yeah.
With the rest of the narrative. Now, again, you can say, but that's what miracles do. You know, they're out of whack. But perhaps it was the way in which he did it as a novelist. But to me, it simply dropped off the edge and provided an ending to the narrative that one, I really couldn't understand, and secondly, couldn't accept. So that's my personal reaction.
Thank you very, very much indeed. the notion of an immediate and thoroughgoing redemption.
Well, was this redemption or retribution?
Retribution, right. In either case, it wasn't real.
Yeah.
Other reactions? Great question.
As to me, it was unexpected, of course, but I was back in 11 years boy, and I realized that there is a quite a realistic way to interpret it. It's just his ideal solution, because he thought it out just to do. But why I make some peace with this, that is, there was no realistic post at the end. So, and the energy, the great energy that this boy released in this maybe imagination. But this energy is workable, so it can work in his life, and it's kind of a solution. It's in my when I was 11 years old, it was kind of a solution to just to imagine, to invent, and then to keep it within a piece of.
I remember distinctly myself when I was in elementary school. You know, I was like this little skinny girl and could get bullied. And the thing that I wanted was a brontosaurus to ride to school. Now, who will feed it and clean up after it, I don't know. But so I could really identify with wanting this powerful figure who was going to make people give you respect. And so when I got to that part of the book, I'm like, you know, a little taken aback, and I'm like, And then once again, like looking at my own reaction and wondering why I couldn't accept a miracle. You know, why couldn't I accept a miraculous happening like that? And then I thought about it more, and I said to myself that, you know, I don't want to know what it would have been like for him to have Rabbi Hirsch die, to have them have to move away. He loses his friend. It's like the collapse of his idealism would have been so painful. I'll go with the goblin.
I think just like previous said by a number of you, I too have a reaction saying, how come it happened this way with mysticism? And I probably similar reaction. I say, couldn't be a better book, and then I start using my own imagination, maybe bring it down more to reality. If the good conquers the evil, then of course maybe you should be, the folks the ones that cleaning up, the wall, Charlie senators and so forth, they will become strong, they will have the cohesion, and they will go in real person and not Gollum to defeat the evil. On the other hand, after I thought about that and actually slept on it for overnight or for a couple of days, then I'm beginning to think about what happened if this is a book that not for me to read, but rather for an 11-year-old, 10-year-old boy to read. What would be his or her, again, what I said earlier, perceptions, experience. It might be very realistic in those days with all the cartoon, comic characters and so forth. It might be very realistic in a way for a boy at that age to read something like this, more than me as an adult, in the 2004. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it, I'm beginning to question myself, is because I don't know a lot about the Jewish heritage, that I don't know about the Jewish mysticism that have history that is being described, talk about Gollum and other things. I think that I would be missed if I don't understand part of that. What happened if someone do have that type of understanding, and whether they believe it or not, it's not important. But it's that exposure. You're going to hear from me again and again. What happened if I'm being brought up as a Chinese Jewish person, what happened if I was a little kid that heard about Gollum and the whole history of the, what do you call it, Kabbalah.
would I react then the same way that I'm reacting now? And that's what is important to me, because I don't have the history, I don't have the understanding, and I don't have the exposure. So I felt that it's not really in place to make a judgment based on who I am and based on saying, well, I like reality. You know, our reality would be, you know, these tough men who get together and, you know, beat up these young punks. But that's the reality that only I can perceive based on my experience. So I'm going to throw it back to you for those that may know more about Gollum and so forth. What is your reaction?
As I was just listening to you talk, I was struck that because of the transformation he experienced in his relationship with the rabbi, he was able to assimilate the stories of the Kabbalah so that he was able to rely on that mysticism to address this terrible situation that he found himself in. So I thought it was kind of like people from different cultures learning from each other and applying their histories and their stories to their situation. And I also thought about this, that that the Irish and the Jews have both been oppressed peoples, and that it's interesting that both have these very rich mystical stories of people that can protect them when they're having, you know, very bad times. I did read this book with my book club, and most of us are mothers in the book club, and the one thing that we really had problems with was that the story ended with such violence. You know, that's one thing that we had trouble with all along, was that there was a tremendous amount of violence throughout the story, and that, you know, to me it was unbelievable that this young boy would have to experience such violence just walking down the street in his neighborhood. But, you know, I would wish that the whole thing could have been addressed without relying again on such horrendous violence.
Thank you very, very much. Actually, let's go around the other way. Just real quickly, a thought on this whole Kabbalah and mysticism idea from a rabbi who's not a huge fan. A couple of people here from my congregation know that I probably don't talk about Kabbalah all that often. I tend to leave that to people like Madonna and Britney Spears. But I think that the truth is that it is a resource that tries to make sense of mystery. I mean, that essentially is what mysticism is about. It is about a life that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, a reality that seems to defy any kind of logical explanation, and it's an invitation to a confrontation with mystery that has one come out on the other end with a sense of an appreciation for even scratching mystery, even scratching the lack of justice, the lack of fairness, the lack of safety, the lack of possibility. It invites additional possibilities that seem to defy what's logical, what's rational, and in fact, perhaps in some cases, what's real. A thought, please.
Edna Frost. I'm living in Brighton right now. But I think these things in reality can happen if you really have faith. Though I know through the centuries, you hear stories of the Golem going back to Kabbalah. But also, if you remember the Shadow series of Mont Cranston, well, we listened to it, yet he studied in the Far East of the Orient, and we thought it was a story then, but actually that stuff does exist. The people who do it have to be very highly advanced. And what I think it did happen in the book, but I think it only went so far as a temporary thing. I think the wife came back to him when that happened, but it was just sort of surreal. But I think after that, though, I think the Golem really did happen. But as far as the wife coming back with that, I don't think it real. I think it was a temporary thing, and I think that maybe the rabbi did get his teeth back and everything else. But I think basically those things do happen, and that's why, I know it came on too suddenly in the book, I think that's really why people think, well, what happened?
I think if he had, if I may, I think if he had presented it as fantasy, I could have moved into it. In other words, if this were something that Michael experienced when he was in the hospital under anesthesia, or if it was a fantasy, what he would like to do, as we all have fantasies, that would have been one thing. Well, Finn McCool, you know, is legend. It's mythic. One dreams of these giants and so on. But the novelist here presents it as reality. And that would believe, no, I could see it happen. I could see, as you said, I would dream that would happen. That the Hulk would come in and just destroy these people, killing it. And as I say, I can see it as idea, fantasy, hope, illusion, but he presents it as fact. And that was my problem.
Brought in the same tone and tenor as everything else in the novel, right?
Yep.
Right.
First of all, I don't really know much about Kabbalah at all. I have no background in this piece, but I felt that Kabbalah was not the central force for the rabbi at all. I think the point's made very strongly in the book that he didn't believe in it, and the boy believes, or maybe the rabbi says something about how he didn't believe in it, that's why he couldn't save his wife, but the reality is, he didn't believe in it because it couldn't have saved him, and it couldn't have saved anyone else in the Holocaust, and I don't think that's the reason he was telling the boy these stories. I think he was trying to create, enrich a world for him, and a world from Prague and from his background. But the lesson that he was really trying to teach the boy was about the danger of silence. And that was his lesson that he had learned from the Holocaust. And it took all these horrible things to happen for the boy to finally learn that lesson. Unfortunately, for poor Michael Devlin, the lesson having been learned, he was powerless to do anything about it. And so then in the end, only a golem or a golem figure or magic or Kabbalah can save the situation, because basically through his own silence, not only is he heard, but the rabbi, this person who's absolutely the most important figure to him in the world, and really becomes his father figure, that person is destroyed. And so he needs to believe that he can bring him back, because now he understands what the rabbi meant by the danger of silence. And it's so hard to learn that lesson until it happens to you personally.
As a 16-year-old girl growing up in South Boston, if you told me I'd be living in Brookline, I would have thought you were crazy. Because Brookline was out of everybody's reach in South Boston. I want to make a couple comments. One, growing up in South Boston, not only did I thought everybody was Irish, I only found that I was half Italian when I was older. And I never met anybody Jewish. I didn't even know Polish was Jewish, sure. But one of the comments I loved growing up in South Boston and as a kid, not as a teenager, because it was a very peaceful kind of place. But what I'd like to say is one of the little stories about Michael going in to get a suit on Sunday. My husband grew up in Worcester, and he told me the story, and I had never heard it before. He said his father took him to what they call Jewtown, and when he was talking about it, it was not a prejudice thing. He said it was just unbelievable. Everything was wide open on a Sunday. Barber shops and clothes stores. He was just totally amazed that this whole world existed. And he too apparently got a suit too. So I just wanted to share that. And I did enjoy the book. And whenever read this book had not been suggested.
I also, the occurred to me while I was sitting here. I've actually lived in Brooklyn, Westport, Connecticut, and Brookline. So I'm not Jewish, but I think I should be adopted or be granted some special dispensation or something by association. I read the book when it first came out, and I want to pick up on something Dr. Benjamin said and amplify a couple of comments made earlier. As I said, I haven't read the book in several years, so I'm not as conversant with some of the themes, but I am conversant with the broad theme of assimilation. And Dr. Benjamin and I were born in the same year, and I was on the other side of that cultural divide, growing up white in white society. And the thing that provoked my comment was that gentleman's comment about Michael being such an enlightened young man at such an early age. And I don't recall from the book his parents, but I know that maybe one of the reasons why I'm here tonight is I remember growing up in a family that was very prejudiced. I can remember horrible remarks, verbatim, that my father made as a child. They still ring in my ears. So I think the point that I have, or would throw out, is we're so much a product of where we come from and the stereotypes that we learn at a very early age. So those of you who are parents, I'm sure because many of you are here, you're sensitive to this, that you're very formative in